Today, we can easily recognize the native peoples of America by their appearance and traditions. But it has been scientifically proven that they once migrated from Asia. In this video, I will tell you about the most ancient early inhabitants of America, who have had darker features and who lived there long before those we now know as Native Americans arrived. Discover important historical stories I couldn't share here. Follow the link to my Telegram channel below. In my previous videos, I presented convincing evidence of the similarities between the indigenous peoples of the Americas and the Turkic peoples, showing that they were once one and the same people. Later, around 25,000 years ago, the ancestors of today's Native Americans migrated from Siberia and Central Asia to the American continents. Those who did not migrate became the Turkic peoples. The development of anthropology and archaeology in the second half of the 20th and 21st centuries has allowed us to learn much more about ancient humans. And recent scientific research has provided astonishing information about the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Anthropological similarity. Appearance. When studying the human remains found in Brazil, known as Luzia, as well as the ancient human bones discovered in an underwater cave in Mexico, known as Naya, it was determined that these individuals had elongated skulls, protruding jaws, deep eye sockets, and broad noses. Researchers unanimously acknowledged that their appearance was very similar to that of the indigenous peoples of Australia. Similar features were also found in many other ancient human remains. Linguistic similarity. This is a debatable, yet one of the most fascinating topics. Some linguists have noted phonetic and grammatical similarities between certain South American languages and the languages of Australia and Melanesia. For example, the presence of rare consonant sounds, ng, mb, nd. Pronoun classifier system, compatible and incompatible forms of the word we. Complex verb morphology and reduplication, repetition of syllables to intensify meaning. Similar structures are also found in the languages of Australia, Papua, and the Amazon region. Although direct kinship has not been proven, such similarities are unlikely to be coincidental. Genetic similarity, DNA. Some indigenous peoples of South America have been found to carry a small admixture of Australo-Melanesian genes. Examples. Among the Suruí and Caritiana tribes of Brazil, about 5 to 10% of DNA related to Melanesians has been identified. The Piarasa people of Venezuela and some groups in the Andes also show South Asian genetic elements. These traces are not found among the indigenous peoples of North America. In a study by Pontus Skoglund, published in Nature in 2015, it was stated that some segments in the genome of South American indigenous peoples are closer to Australians and Papuans than to Asians. This may represent a genetic relic of an ancient population that was the first to settle in the Americas. Their cultures. Their cultures were also similar to those of the indigenous peoples of Australia. For example, both the ancient indigenous peoples of the Americas and the Aboriginal Australians buried their dead with ochre, a type of mineral pigment. Both groups were nomadic hunters, painted cave walls, and used masks in ritual ceremonies. Despite the vast geographical distance between them, similarities such as ochre burials and the use of ritual masks attract significant attention. In conclusion, it can be said that long before the migration from Asia of those whom we now know as the indigenous peoples of the Americas, the continents of America were inhabited by an earlier population with distinctive physical features. Modern research shows that these ancient peoples had a darker skin tone and had certain similarities in appearance with the indigenous peoples of Australia, as well as with Melanesian and Papuan groups, and in some cases even Africans. If you had been in the Americas 30,000 years ago, you would have encountered people who looked similar to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. Later, with the arrival of the ancestors of the modern indigenous peoples of the Americas from Asia, the earlier populations, who have resembled the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, gradually disappeared over time. Archaeological findings show that significant cultural transformations spread from North to South America, suggesting that major population movements and interactions began in the north and eventually influenced both continents. If their interactions had been mostly peaceful, through intermarriage and cultural exchange, we would expect to see traces of a blended culture with shared characteristics. However, the pronounced cultural shifts observed in many regions suggest that the later arrivals gradually replaced or assimilated the earlier populations. Significant differences were observed especially in weaponry. For example, the early inhabitants, whose physical features were similar to those of Aboriginal Australians, mainly used clubs with stone heads and digging sticks. Their spears had simple tips made from unshaped, sharpened stone. In other words, their weapons were heavy, poorly sharpened, and primarily designed for close combat. The ancestors of the indigenous peoples of the Americas who came from Siberia possessed highly advanced weapons for their time. They had stone spearheads, known as clovis. The clovis were light, strong, and extremely sharp, featuring notches for attachment to a shaft. This weapon was powerful enough to pierce even a mammoth's hide. In addition, they used a throwing device called an atoll, which allowed a warrior to hurl a short spear up to 100 meters. In tactical terms, the native inhabitants of America who came from Asia had a significant advantage. While the ancient inhabitants of America lived in small groups consisting of several families, the newcomers from Asia lived in tribal communities. In open battles, they had numerical superiority and were skilled at surrounding their enemies. As a result, the ancient indigenous groups, who had less advanced weaponry and military tactics, were largely defeated. It is also possible that some of them declined due to new infectious diseases introduced by the incoming populations from Asia. Many historians note that events in human history often repeat themselves following a similar pattern. Just like the European expansions of the 16th to 19th centuries, similar processes may have taken place thousands of years earlier, with the arrival of populations from Asia. When the ancestors of modern indigenous peoples of the Americas, who possessed advanced weapons and effective military tactics for their time, reached the continent, it likely led to the decline or displacement of the peoples who had lived there before them. Modern science has established that long before the arrival of peoples from Asia, there were ancient humans living in the Americas who shared similarities with the early inhabitants of Australia and Oceania. Research also shows that the indigenous peoples of Australia and the Papuans living in Oceania descended from ancient migrants from Africa. There are important scientific views on how these early humans managed to reach Southeast Asia, Australia, and the Americas from distant Africa thousands of years ago. You can learn more about this topic in my Telegram channel, linked below the video.